Honda Civic Review. From £17,725. 8-point Introduction. Plenty of them claim to do it every time they replace any model, but when Honda says it's been working on this, the 10th generation Civic, as part of a project stretching back fully 7 years, and that making it has cost more money, time and effort than any other model replacement program in its history, including, presumably, the current NSX, you begin to believe that all new, in this instance, really means just that. Your eyes confirm as much when you first see the car. Having grown significantly longer and wider than the outgoing Civic as well as becoming lower to the ground, the new model has distanced itself from the unorthodox styling that, more than anything else, made its predecessor a bit of a niche choice. The new Civic has abandoned the unorthodox layout that allowed the previous couple of generations their flip-up rear seat cushions, favoring instead a design that prioritizes the lower center of gravity, low-slung driving position, widened axle tracks and plenty more besides that suggest handling dynamism and driver engagement ought to be chief among the car's most attractive qualities. Also offered is a pair of all-new turbocharged petrol engines directly related to the one that powered the Civic Type R hot hatch of 2015. For all those reasons and more, this new model promises to offer a greater challenge to Europe's 5-door hatchback elite than any of its forebears and demands the chance to prove itself in a full auto car road test. The new Civic also brings greater strategic importance for the factory in which it is made. Honda's UK manufacturing facility in Swindon will be the global production hub for the 5-door Civic, the only factory in the world where Civic hatchbacks will be made. So will the global car treatment serve the Civic brand better than the left-field, Eurocentric approach has? Design and styling. The philosophy that brought us the previous 2 generations of European Civic has been shattered into tiny pieces by this new car. With a global audience in going Civic's underwhelming record of European success as an advert for the alternative approach, Honda decided that hatchback buyers on this continent are not as sensitive to size as they once thought. Bigger, then, is better. The new Civic is 136mm longer than the car it replaces, representing a growth spurt the likes of which you almost never see among cars cracked up to be compact. It's 30mm wider, too, and 20mm lower, the latter measurement further enhancing the former, while its wheelbase is within millimeters of being the longest in the class. The new all-steel monocoque platform makes for a slightly lighter but also significantly stiffer body in white structure than that which went before. But it's the repositioning of the car's fuel tank, formerly in a quirky location under the previous generation car's front seats, to where it's most commonly found under the back seats that has allowed Honda to drop the driver's hip point by some 35mm, as well as lowering its cabin floor and dropping its overall center of gravity by a full 10mm. The previous Civic's atmospheric petrol engines have been dropped and a new pair of aluminium block turbocharged replacements ushered in. The smaller of the two displaces just under a liter and has 3 cylinders, direct fuel injection and a peak power output of 127 bhp. The larger one, powering our test car, is a 1.5-liter 4-cylinder unit with 180 bhp and 177 pounds-foot. Both engines adopt Honda's trademark I-Tech valve timing technology and both, says Honda, are directly related to the 306 bhp 2.0-liter turbo that powered the outgoing Civic Type R. A 1.6-liter I-Tech turbodiesel will join the Civic's engine range later this year. Otherwise, it's the car's suspension that shows the most evidence of change. While the previous Civic used space-saving torsion beam rear suspension, this new one switches to a multi-link setup that should allow Honda greater ride and handling tuning potential. Adaptive damping is also now available on both axles, having been pioneered on the rear axle of the outgoing Civic Tourer. Our upper mid-level Sport Plus specification test car had it. Interior. The wholesale changes made to the Civic's interior ought to prove less decisive than those performed on its exterior. All that extra wheelbase length has edged the cabin towards Skoda Octavia-style spaciousness, and Honda's never-ending quest to deliver premium surroundings has continued apace, which isn't to say, of course, that everyone will be happy. The repositioning of the fuel tank has necessitated a rethink of the ingenious magic rear seats, meaning there's no flipping the seat bases up and out of the way in order to fit usually tall loads behind the front seats. That's a shame, but elsewhere the shift towards conventionality feels more like a maturing than a backward step. Because the fuel tank no longer resides under the front seats, Honda has been able to drop the driver considerably closer to the lower floor, more so, perhaps, than in any rival family hatch. The consequence for keen motorists is considerable and indulged further by a dashboard that replaces the discordant quirky surfaces of its predecessor for something much sleeker. Cleverly inclined and now with a proper center console and stack, the Civic feels more at ease with its switchgear placement and is easier on the eye and, yes, easily more grown up, too. A peerless amalgamation of materials it isn't. The plastic overdose prescribed by the previous generation is partly addressed by fewer hollow-sounding surfaces, but Honda still isn't as good at handling the cabin's cheaper plastics as well as Volkswagen or even Mazda are. That won't concern those in the rear, though, where passengers ought to come as close to stretching out as this class of car realistically allows. The boot is no less generously proportioned. The Sport Plus's 420 liters of seats-up capacity easily eclipses the class yardstick, and, even without any sorcery occurring under the rear bench, it expands to 770 liters with an admirably flat floor. The 770 millimeters of load space height won't stop previously indulged mountain bikers from grumbling, but the price for such orthodoxy is ultimately well paid out. Honda's Connect infotainment system is now in its second generation, and in its generosity of specification at least, Sport Plus's 7.0 in touchscreen can hardly be faulted. There's sat-nav, supplied by Garmin, 2 USB sockets and 1 HDMI jack, a DAB tuner, Bluetooth, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto and an upgraded 8-speaker audio system. Short of generating its own Wi-Fi hotspot without needing a connection to your phone, that's pretty much everything on our family hatch wish list covered. Only the usability suffers slightly in comparison with rival units, mostly because the fixed controls to the right-hand side of the touchscreen, audio, home, volume, menu and back, require an overly assertive finger push to operate. Had Honda supplied a three-dimensional knob for the volume control and a physical button for back, the system's broader quirks might have been less noticeable. Trifling stuff, perhaps, but ease of use tends to describe the difference between first-rate infotainment and the rest. Performance. For a company that prides itself on making fine petrol engines, the comparative performance of the outgoing four-cylinder units will have been a source of mild distress to Honda. Credit where it's due, then, the Civic's turbocharged replacements returned the firm to the cutting-edge fold, and in a way that remains idiosyncratically pleasing, too. We've driven the new 3-cylinder motor elsewhere and complimented its well-mannered usability and inherent parsimoniousness, but the larger 1.5-liter 4 is demonstratively the much more potent option. Honda claims a 0 to 62 miles per hour time of 8.3 seconds, but we went half a second quicker to 60 miles per hour with more than 200 kilograms of collective road tester heft aboard. Not so long ago, that would have been sufficient for hot hatch respectability, but even now it lands the Civic comfortably at the head of the downsized petrol field and equivalent to the kind of performance we've previously wrested from the hybridized VW Golf GTE. The Civic's delivery is no less likable, primarily because the introduction of forced induction has not made an empty acronym of tech. In fact, while there is now inevitably more twist to play with than before, with 177 pounds-foot available from 1,900 revolutions per minute, it is of a lazier and less substantial sort than the forcefully linear Golf GTE- as evidenced by the Honda's tendency to move from 30 to 70 miles per hour undoubted low revs at a noticeably slower pace. So while the Civic's functionality at medium crank speeds is improved, it still politely suggests that it is building to something, that being the unexpectedly keen and pleasantly reminiscent surge that appears at 4,000 revolutions per minute and remains unfettered until the limiter at 6,500 revolutions per minute. It is this hard-edged eagerness, and the immodest 180 bhp that appears at 5,500 revolutions per minute, that differentiates the Civic from most of its rivals, just as it agreeably connects it to the brand's recent past. Combined with 49.6 miles per gallon touring potential and an amenable 6-speed manual gearbox, that makes the 1.5i turbo a genuine selling point. Ride and handling. Now some slightly less encouraging news. All Honda's talk of added handling dynamism for the new Civic was to be swallowed with a big pinch of salt, it turns out. Much as the firm is keen to grow and subtly change the Civic's customer base, it plainly couldn't afford to alienate the more traditional core who like a pleasant, comfortable and easy-to-drive hatchback, and they will find a lot to like about this new one. Driven at everyday speeds on most UK roads, the Civic feels solid, planted, settled and reassuring. To point out that it has big car feel hardly seems necessary, given that it's plainly a relatively large car among its rivals. And yet the meaty weight and moderate pace of its steering, the excellent bump-thump isolation of its generally smooth ride and the stability-first bias of its handling all show how the impression of a bigger saloon has been engineered in here. First-rate suppression of wind noise would make the Civic remarkably quiet if not for the fact that a slightly intrusive amount of road roar finds its way into the cabin. It's only a problem over particularly coarse surfaces but is at odds with the Civic's general demeanor as a hatchback so comfortable, refined, spacious and mature feeling that it could otherwise almost pass for a more expensive saloon. That the Civic doesn't handle with the natural agility of a smaller 5-door, despite the influence of that lower center of gravity, is disappointing, but it was predictable, and it's no particularly stinging criticism in a class where a dwindling number of hatchbacks really deliver an engaging driving experience. The Honda is a long way from a chore to drive quickly, though. Its handling is precise and responsive enough and its grip levels are fairly high, but the fluency that our test car's adaptive dampers provided just above town speeds is replaced by a slightly grabby, fussy ride at higher motorway speeds and on quicker A and B roads. Beyond a certain speed, the electronically augmented suspension appears more interested in dialing out body movement as quickly and completely as possible than in maintaining good, predictable body control, and it becomes hard to read and tough to take confidence from at times. Although it proved acceptably precise and composed around the Millbrook Hill route, in harder cornering our Civic test car felt like it might have benefited from Honda's optional 18-in wheels and more performance-orientated tires than the Michelin Primacy rubber with which it was fitted. While body control was good and grip levels high enough to carry plenty of speed on a smooth surface, when that adhesion ran out it made the car understeer on corner exit and scrabble at the asphalt a little untidily. The hill route's bigger bumps and compressions provided tough tests for the Honda's damping reserves, and it didn't always pass with distinction, lacking fluency under higher vertical loads and allowing bumps to disturb stability slightly. The car's electronic stability control system worked fairly well but didn't prevent power on understeer as neatly as it might have. MPG and running costs. building the Civic in Swindon is to Honda's advantage when it comes to the UK market, but that hasn't meant customers here have enjoyed rock-bottom prices, mostly because the brand is famously adamant about the model's positioning, and such a policy generally negates the kind of bargain basement options that Kia and Vauxhall typically offer. As a result, the Civic lineup starts beyond £18,000 for a 1.0 SE and stops, excluding the upcoming Type R, at just shy of £28,000 for a 1.5-litre Prestige with CVT. In between the two are SR, X, Sport and Sport Plus, the last of which, after paint, costs £25,930. In Golf terms, very much Honda's benchmark, that amount would until recently have seen you into a similarly high-spec GT edition with a 148 bhp 1.4 TSI engine, or else a Ford Focus Titanium X with a 180 bhp 1.5-litre petrol unit. In other words,